Okay, a basic shifting analysis of different motorcycles using a stock gearing, stock front and rear sprockets, stock gearing transmission, and chain lengths, pitch, and everything. Pulled it straight from gearingcommander.com, just plugged in a bunch of different bikes of interest. Looking at the graphs here, what you see are the 6 lines for the RPMs between, say, 4,700 RPM and 7,000 RPM. I set the 7,000 RPM for each one based on my normal maximum shifting RPM from my FJ1200. The software set the left line, and basically I would say that I normally shift at the left side here. I would call the right, this center card portion, performance riding. So for the CBR 250R, you can see 70 miles per hour at 7,000 RPM with 6 gear. For the Ninja 250, you see 56 miles per hour in top gear. Here for the Ninja 300, a little bit better, 65. The gsx-r, a little bit better at 72, about 15 miles an hour faster, top gear. Gixxer 6080, a little bit longer. These bikes generally have a much higher power peak. The V-Strom is going to be a single, much lower, but still much longer final gearing, 95 miles per hour. The Ninja 650 is a V-twin, vertical twin, it's still about 94. The FC8 is a nice inline 4. I like it as a good bike, all-around bike, 95. GX10R, nice power bike, decent handling sport bike, about 100 at top gear, 7,000 RPM. The V-Strom again, another large single, much longer legs there. The R1, not too bad at 100 miles an hour at top gear. Looking at the Pan and Gal, much longer, 122 in 6 gear, very long in top 2 gears. The VFR 1200, not too bad, 115 at 6 gear. And we have the Ninja 12, ZX12 is a slightly older version of the 14 at 122, is about the same as the Pan and Gal. And the FJ12 is a 5-speed bike, much wider spacing in the gears, 115 and 7,000 RPM 5th gear. And the Hayabusa at about 128 in 6th gear. I personally find the Busa to be a nice sport bike, all-around bike, a little slow handling, but I don't complain about the gearing. So the power and the gearing are good in the Busa. It's just a question of really how fast you want to ride it, how fast you need to turn it. And for me, I've taken it to red line plenty of times at low speeds, low tight corners and streets, normal speed street riding in the first 2 or 3 gears. So I don't find it to be too long, and really it's not too long in the high end either. The overdrive is nice, and I think the bigger bikes have a nice overdrive in the top 2 gears. Sometimes I find myself cruising in 4th gear even at the highway speeds. You can see in the Busa here at 87 in 3rd gear at 7,000 RPM. I mean, seriously, those bikes will just cruise all day long in the top 2 or 3 gears. And you have to consciously shift them up to 5th and 6th gear at highway speeds, normal highway speeds. So anyway, there's the data. Now normally what I would do is plot this up in some kind of bar graph or something for easy comparison, quick comparison, but I thought I'd show the raw data this time just to sort of save all that trouble, all that time. And the next thing I would like to do is plot acceleration versus RPM for each bike in each gear. That would be really nice to do, short of actually having to get a accelerometer, go out there, put it on the bike and ride it. I'd like to be able to look at the theoretical power curves, sorry, the dyno curves, the real power curves, and look at the gearing and somehow convert that into acceleration, assuming a certain level of traction, assuming a certain level of inertia in the bike for the wheels, and also for the front wheel staying on the ground or no more than a couple inches. Because one of the big problems you have is, at what point does the bike want to roll over onto its back wheel? That's obviously going to limit your acceleration. So anyway, I think that's enough said for one video, and the next ones are going to become more complicated and more mathematical. It could be fun. But even saying that, I think you can see, you know, you pretty much have what you have with certain bikes. You're not going to go in there and get new transmission gears put in the bike, for instance. You can change the final gearing. Front and rear sprockets are easy enough to change. You have to change them at least a couple of times over the life of the bike anyway, because they're going to wear out. But it takes a lot of change to make a significant change in the road speed versus RPM. I mean, you have to pull like 5 or 6 sprockets off or add to the rear to get 1,000 mile per hour, 1,000 RPM difference. And the front, there's not really much you can do with the front because it's so small. You're only going to add like a couple of sprockets or take off a couple of sprockets. So roughly, the ratio roughly is 3 sprockets at the rear, or 3 teeth at the rear, sorry, for each gear tooth at the front. And you can add or subtract 50 miles an hour, you know, per RPM in 6th gear. But it's not easy to do that in the lower gears because you just don't have that much RPM or real estate to play with. So don't think you're going to buy a bike and go, oh, I'll just put on a longer gearing and, you know, stretch out the top 2 or 3 gears by a significant amount. I would say you probably cannot do that. You're probably not going to change it by more than 1,000 RPM at the most in top gear. So you have what you have. The smaller bikes and smaller displacement have a high ratio, or should I say low gearing, because they don't have much power. It's just all there is to it. So they need the high gearing, or should I say low gearing, sorry, to give them reasonable acceleration. But you can see, even given the fact that they have really short gearing, they're still slow per RPM, and you still have to wind the hell out of them. Doubling that displacement, doubling horsepower, it just does a big thing, and then obviously you double it again to go to a 1200. That also does a big thing. I think somewhere for the average rider, for the average road condition, both cruising right around town, you really need something more than a 300. I mean, 300s are city bikes. They're fine for, you know, 65 miles an hour at 7,000 RPM in 6th gear. It's fine for riding around, you know, stop and go traffic. It's not something you want to deal with when you're cruising for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, you know, on a bike. On the other hand, a motorcycle is not really what you want to ride to cruise for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. So there's like a left side and a right side. You're going to do some city riding with any bike. You're going to do some highway riding with any bike, but you're not going to do a lot of highway riding, and you can only ride in the city so much because you're not going to really want to ride in the rain in the city. So don't think you're going to buy a bike and commute all the time, or you're going to buy a bike and take it for 6 or 7 hour trips. It's unlikely that you're going to do either one of those. So I think that for a starter bike, you can talk nonsense all day long about getting a 300 and talk about the fuel economy, but I think for practical riding, you know, a 600 is really the low end. A liter bike should be fine at the high end. 1300, maybe it's overkill, depending on whether you're riding 1 up or 2 up. But a 300, man, it's, you know, that's like eating rice and beans every day in terms of motorcycle riding. It's just too slow and geared too short, in my opinion. And that was one of the reasons I did this, is just to get some real-world data on what's out there. I looked at a wide variety of bikes, dual-purpose, you know, street bikes, sport bikes, standards, cruisers. The data's right in front of you. And you can talk about modding a bike and adding power and all this kind of crap to it. You're talking about spending a lot of money, and the results are never going to be what you think they're going to be. It's just really more entertainment than anything else. You can get some performance advantage out of a bike, but you're not going to make a big, huge change to a bike, short of changing a bike. So that's the data. Now we'll see what the opinions are. As they say, the opinions and the data are always at odds. So let's see what